Yemen's Houthi rebels are vowing to continue their attacks on Red Sea shipping after the U.S. and Britain launched another round of airstrikes. The U.S. and the U.K. say they have hit dozens of targets inside Yemen, including underground weapons depots, missile systems, and launchers. Iran-backed Houthis have attacked multiple vessels in the Red Sea since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war in October. More on this. I'm joined from Sydney by Middle East analyst Rodger Shanahan. Rodger, what effect do you think these strikes will have? Will they make the Red Sea safer or deter the militias from attacking Western targets?
Well, listen, as you pointed out before, at the start of an increased number of attacks against Houthi targets, but up until now, even though the Houthis have been very active in firing both anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and using drones, most of those attacks have been interdicted. And what we're seeing now is also some of the infrastructure being destroyed, rocket launch systems, radar systems, stockpiles. So I think what we're going to see is a diminution in the number and quality of attacks, but it's going to take some time. So I think we're part way through that campaign. It obviously hasn't deterred them to this point, but there's a degrade mission in there as well. So that latter one will take a bit longer.
The Biden administration insists that it's not seeking a wider war in the Middle East, but many in the region do view the U.S. strikes as an escalation.
Well, listen, quantitatively, they've increased, and that has been signalled for the last week after 3 US service personnel were killed in the Tower 22 base in Jordan, and that was signalled well in advance, and most governments in the region and militia groups in the region would also understand that there are particular red lines that if they're crossed, there'll be a particular type of response. Death of US service personnel is one of those red lines. So we're seeing that playing out at the moment. So I wouldn't necessarily characterise it as an escalation, but it's an increased response to the death of US service personnel, but still keeping it within a constrained set of targets and constrained geographically. So it's an increase rather than escalation. Even though I know that might be passing words, it's still important on the ground.
Let's talk about Iran's role in all this, Rodger. Many accused Iran of pulling the strings behind the scenes when it comes to the militias. What's your assessment on that?
Well, listen, it's always very difficult to tell the degree of connectivity between Iran and a particular event or attack by a militia group. Certainly Iran funds, trains, provides logistical support to, and sometimes personnel support to these militia groups, and they provide them general guidance and general direction. So it's sometimes referred to as the Islamic current. So these groups generally know what Iran wants, but the degree to which each individual attack is specifically directed by Iran is not known, and just through sheer practicality, they can't direct every attack. But regardless of whether they're responsible for each individual attack, they're responsible for the overall direction and the attacks against US interests in the region.
Rodger, thank you very much for talking with us this morning. That was Middle East analyst Rodger Shanahan in Sydney, Australia.
Elisabeth Kendall is a Middle East expert at Girton College, part of the University of Cambridge. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us. Are you seeing any evidence that these airstrikes are actually deterring the Houthis?
Not yet. There's very little evidence yet that these airstrikes are deterring the Houthis. But of course, that does depend on how much they succeed in knocking out. And we're seeing this escalation, this increasing number of airstrikes hitting targets. Perhaps it will start to have some effect. But we must remember that the Houthis will be prepared. They know the strikes are coming. They're very adaptable. It will actually harden their resolve. And this is what we're hearing, because they are seeing broad support in Yemen for their own stand against the US and in favor of the Palestinians as they pitch it. And you have to remember that the United States is not that popular in Yemen, not just amongst the Houthi hardliners, but the last time we had a survey, an Arab World Youth Survey that's distinguished country by country, that was back in 2016, the United States was unpopular amongst 82% of the population. So hardened fighters, able to prepare, broadly supported, no, it won't deter them, not in the short term.
And we have to mention that this is the third round of U.S.-led strikes against Iranian-backed militias in as many days. Does this still look like, more broadly speaking, does this still look like a mere tit for tat, or are we really witnessing, a proxy war unfolding here between Washington and Tehran?
That's an excellent question. I think we are seeing a real escalation now. It's not whether or not this will escalate. This is escalating. It feels like more than a tit for tat when the strikes are happening on an almost daily basis, when they're sustained, when they're hitting dozens of targets. But that said, I think that there are two signs that neither side wants this to turn into a long-term proxy war or an all-out war. One sign is that the United States is still telegraphing its airstrikes in advance, so it gives the enemy time to prepare, and that Iran and its partners are playing down the effect of those strikes, which enables them to not to have to take major reprisals. That one thing we need to bear in mind, though, is that even if neither side wants an escalation, it is a matter of making sure that the calculations are well calibrated. It only needs one miscalculation, and we could see it spiral out of control. This is how conflicts escalate.
If Iran is pulling the strings behind the scenes, and there's been much speculation about whether or not that is indeed the case, perhaps you would like to weigh in on that as well. What exactly is in it for Tehran on the immediate basis, would you say?
I think that there is a real question over how much Iran actually controls its proxies and partners in its so-called axis of resistance. And the answer to that is probably to differing extents. I imagine that its control over groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and some of the Shi'i militias in Syria and Iraq is probably greater than it is over the Houthis in Yemen, who are very much going into their escalation as something that is extremely beneficial to them domestically. But we must ask, if Iran has armed, trained, supported, and encouraged these partners in its axis of resistance, can it actually fully control them? Would they stand down even if it asked them to? So in the meantime, Iran gains, to answer your second question, Iran gains from this kind of low-level tit-for-tat conflict because it increases its popularity as framed as the defender of Palestine, and it also goads the United States into showing its true cards and looking like a belligerent in the region. And frankly, this is an asymmetric war. So the United States tends to lose just by not winning, whereas Iran and its partners can win simply by being a constant and persistent thorn in the side of the United States and Israel.
Elisabeth Kendall, Middle East expert at Girton College, part of the University of Cambridge. Thank you.
You're welcome.